This is Chris with Phoenix Gaming, and today we're going to talk about how to read a Warscroll for Age of Sigmar. This is going to be a pretty quick video. We're going to talk about what a Warscroll means and just what all the information on it actually means. Nothing too complex or crazy. A Warscroll is a collection of your unit's stats and information. It provides the characteristics, abilities, and attacks, and all the relevant information you're going to need to play a game. With Age of Sigmar, you can play with only the War Scrolls. You don't have to use the Battle Tomes, but you're going to have a lot more information and a lot more rule support if you use the Battle Tomes. That being said, we're going to jump into a breakdown of it. In 40K, we just call them data sheets. It's a War Scroll in Sigmar. Let's dig into what information is on there. We're going to look at the Dankhold Trog boss and his War Scroll right now. If you look at the top left circle, it's pretty self-explanatory. The move tells you how far he moves. The save is his save characteristic. You're going to find in Sigmar, things tend to have a worse save than they do in 40K, and you're going to find that Rend or AP is a little less prevalent as well, so it's just a slightly different interaction there. Wounds are your hit points or wounds. That is the same. Bravery just replaces your leadership characteristic. And really, the way leadership interacts is very similar to how it interacted in 8th edition 40K. So if you've played 40K, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, but we'll break that down a bit more in another video. If you look where it says melee weapons there on the data sheet, it's going to break down all his melee attacks. You get them all. It's not a pick one. You get every attack on the data sheet. If they have a ranged attack, it'll say missile weapons, and it'll list the missile weapons, melee weapons. When you look at those weapons, you'll see for the melee weapons, a range. So this gentleman has a boulder club that has a range of 2 inches. The attacks is how many dice, so he'll roll 4 dice. The 2 hit is what he needs to hit, and then the 2 wound is what he needs to wound. So you're going to find, again, if you're like me and you're coming from 40K, there's a little bit different interaction where there's no strength or toughness. All the information you need for a data sheet or War Scroll is on that War Scroll, the hit roll, the wound roll, etc. It does create a little bit different dynamic. It makes monsters feel very weird when they're getting wounded on 3s by infantry, etc. But the game is designed with this interaction in mind. So while it is a little weird coming from 40K, it isn't bad. It's just different. And things have inflated wounds, better saves to kind of reflect that. The reason the range characteristic exists on melee is because AoS has a larger engagement range, and we'll do a whole separate video about engagement range and the fight phase because, again, that's where a lot of the nuance of the game is going to sit, and that's where you're going to be able to get some extra movement and stuff like that. Description tells you what you need to know about the unit, like what is in the unit and how it is equipped. And then the ability section is just a list of all the abilities that unit has. And they happen and work the way it says. So if we look at his magical resistance, it says each time this unit is affected by a spell or endless spell, you can roll a die, and if you do so on a 4+, you ignore the effects of the spell. So some important wording is in there. It says you can roll a die, meaning it's a choice, not you will or you must or roll a die. The fact that the word can is in there makes it a choice, meaning you can allow your spells to go through and ignore your opponents, or you can allow some of your opponent's spells to affect it if you want to for whatever reason. That is always on. It just works. And that's how the abilities work, is they just work whenever they are triggered, or if it's like a passive ability, it always works. However, you see a section next to it that says command abilities, and those are actually going to function very similar to how stratagems function in 40K. And this is one of the things I actually like a lot more about Sigmar when compared to 40K, is that your stratagems are baked into the datasheet, and they only have access to whatever one is baked into their datasheet. If you look at the bottom of the War Scroll, that's where all your keywords are. Again, very familiar layout. We should all be pretty used to how this works. We're going to talk briefly about command abilities, and it's really just because they function a lot differently than stratagems, even though that's how they effectively are. And we're not going to do in-depth, just a quick overview. You spend 1 command point to activate the command ability. The command ability will tell you when it can be activated. And in order to activate the ability, the unit using it must either have a unit champion, which is like your sergeant, and some units don't, or they might have died for whatever reason, or be within 12 inches of a hero, or be within 18 inches of a general, or be within 18 inches of totems. And these distances are wholly within, rather than write wholly within a bunch of times, wanted to write it this way. And wholly within is a lot more prevalent in Sigmar, meaning you have to kind of be very careful on how you position. You need to make sure your units are by their heroes, stuff like that. You can't daisy chain things out for the most part to benefit from multiple buffs. You're going to have to huddle around the hero and be wholly within his aura in order for it to work for most situations. And it will tell you. Now, there is a lot more nuance to this, but this gives you an idea of how they work and how positioning is important. In addition to this, we're going to talk about bracketing. Certain units with a lot of wounds will bracket or degrade, depending on what words you want to use, but some units don't actually degrade. Things like Scarbrand actually get better as he takes damage. And it just means that some stats change as they take damage. And if you look at the attacks characteristic of Kragnos, it's got an asterisk. That means the number of attacks with his hooves and Rack of Ruin change as he takes damage, as does his movement, as you can see the asterisk up there. And all you need to do is simply look at the damage table and determine what it is changes as he takes damage. But what that also means is you need to track your damage taken, not your wounds remaining. So you're tracking damage inversely of how we normally do it in 40K. So normally what we do in 40K is we show the opponent how many wounds are left on that model. So if you look at things that degrade right now in 10th edition, it'll say 1 to 4 wounds remaining or 1 to 6 wounds remaining. Whereas in AoS, you're going to see that the brackets happen a lot more and it's based off the damage taken. And it's really just a different way to say the same thing. Also, make sure you read the abilities because other abilities can change as well. If you look at his Bellow of Rage ability and you look at the damage table, you'll see that the Bellow of Rage has something in it that changes based on how much damage he's taken. So just make sure you're reading all the relevant information. And remember, you can get all the War Scrolls. You can just kind of look them up, use them for free. You just won't have all the Battle Tome information, but it allows you to get a feel for the game, decide whether or not you like it before committing to it. And honestly, like I said, it's it's different enough from 40K now in its 3rd edition that it feels like its own separate game. And I appreciate that a lot more than when it just felt like shittier 40K, which was how I felt about the early editions of the game. There's a lot more polish on it now that we're late into 3rd edition and the battle tomes have, for the most part, all come out. Their seasons only change annually right now. So again, there's a lot of positives in AoS right now. So if you're one of those people who's looking at maybe some different games while GW fixes the issues with 10th, Sigmar is not a bad option to give you a large model war game feel and be different enough from 40K that you're not feeling like you're just playing a fantasy skin of 40K. Big shout out to my immortals, Captain Too Tall, the real Donnie G, Lord Wellingstone, and Daniel Bodecker. Thank you guys. Your support is awesome. I appreciate it. And thanks for watching.